Last night we started to go through the first formal teaching of the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting in motion the wheel of the Dharma. And this was a very important teaching. The tradition sees it as very important. This is the teaching that starts to turn the wheel. The wheel is a major symbol for Buddhism. The wheel for Buddhism is similar to the crucifix for Christianity. The wheel has multiple layers of symbolism. Its roundness indicates completion, wholeness. Also, a wheel moves. It's very dynamic. You have different wheels with different numbers of spokes. Some wheels have 8 spokes, some have 12, and some have 24. The different number of spokes have different symbolic meanings. If there's 8 spokes, it's the Eightfold Path. If it's 12, it's the 12 conditional relationships in the standard formula of dependent arising. And if it's 24, it's the 24 conditional relationships that you find in the Abhidharma. So the wheel of the Dharma is a very important symbol. Now this discourse is about getting that wheel to turn. The first thing to notice is that when the Buddha is awakened and becomes the Buddha, the wheel is not turning. It hasn't turned yet. It only starts to turn with this teaching. And we'll see why when we come to the end. The Buddha wants to express his awakening, but more importantly, he wants to express the path that leads to awakening, the right practice. So he looks for his 5 companions who are ascetics, and he teaches them the middle way between asceticism and indulgence. And he's telling them that you're caught in a bind, like I was. We saw that a life devoted to getting more money, more pleasure, more sex, more possessions, more status, that this did not lead to awakening. So we thought we'd try the opposite. We went against pleasure. We would cultivate pain instead. But that doesn't work, and it doesn't work because it's the opposite. Because we're swinging from one extreme to the other, bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The path is to be found in the middle way, a dynamic balance between the 2 extremes, not getting stuck on either one, and even more dynamically, not getting stuck at all. When we are practicing, we can get stuck on our pain. If the experience is painful, we can get stuck there. We identify with the pain. This is me. This is my life. I can't do this. Other people can do this, but I can't. We can also get stuck on the pleasure. I get a nice samadhi state. Everything is pleasant. Everything is good, and I don't want to move. I'll just stay here. I feel comfortable here, so I won't move. We can be stuck on pleasure. We can be stuck on pain. For the Buddha, the problem is the stuckness. That's always the problem. Reality itself is dynamic. Later on in his teaching, he'll talk about it in terms of impermanence. Everything is impermanent. Everything is changing. Nothing stays still. When we're practicing, we need to practice impermanence. We need to be dynamic in the way that we practice. It keeps changing. One sitting is not like the last one. It's different, it's new, so we start again. And the next one is different, so it's new, so we start again. And we're constantly starting again and learning all over again, which some people can find very frustrating. You never get to the point where you're satisfied that you actually know it, because you start again and it's new. So it can be frustrating, but it can also be really interesting. It never gets boring. Once you realize how dynamic it is, you cannot be bored with it because it's always new, always fresh. So this is the middle way. So the Buddha teaches the middle way, and he says the middle way is the Noble Eightfold Path, and then he teaches the Four Truths. Now the Four Truths are the basic framework for his teaching. And tonight we'll have a look at these four truths. These are the four Arya Satchani. Satchani is truths, Satcha is truth, singular, and Arya is noble or cultivated or refined. So these are normally translated as the noble truths, Chattaro Arya Satchani. But there's been some discussion among the scholars about this, and some people say, actually, it's not four noble truths, it's the four truths of the noble one. The one who is noble, the one who is cultivated, refined, sees these four truths. So seeing these four truths make one Arya, make one noble, cultivated, refined. That's another way of looking at it. Or they are the four truths which ennoble the practitioner, which cultivate the practitioner. So there's different ways of looking at it. Here I'm translating it as the truths of the noble one. The noble one here being the Buddha. So the four truths of the Buddha. But there are different ways of translating. The Buddha says, this is the noble one's truth of dukkha. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are dukkha. Association with the unloved is dukkha, separation from the loved is dukkha, not getting what one wants is dukkha. In brief, the five aggregates associated with clinging are dukkha. This is the noble one's truth of the arising of dukkha. It is craving, which leads to further becoming, is bound up with obsession and delight, and finds its delight now here, now there. Specifically, craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. This is the noble one's truth of the cessation of dukkha. It is the complete cessation of that very craving, abandoning it, renouncing it, releasing it, letting it go. This is the noble one's truth of the way leading to the cessation of dukkha, the noble eightfold path of right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right energy, right mindfulness, and right unification. So these are the four truths, and we'll just go through them. The first one is dukkha. It all begins with dukkha. There are two teachings of the Buddha that often, when people first hear them, they don't like. And one of them is dukkha, and the other is anatta. They both have a frightening flavour to them. The Buddha has a bad reputation among some people for this insistence on dukkha. What an old misery fellow he is. So first, what is dukkha, and why does he begin with dukkha? Well, first of all, dukkha is usually translated in English as suffering, but sometimes you see different translations. Unsatisfactoriness is one. Thanissaro Bhikkhu translates it as stress. Dukkha is a compound word. It's the word ka, which is the hub of a wheel, and again we have a wheel, and the prefix du, which means bad, difficult, unpleasant, painful, awful, and so on and so forth. The hub of a wheel, which is unsatisfactory, bad. There are at least two different ways that the tradition talks about this. One is, you have a vehicle, say you have a motor car, and you want the motor car to drive very smoothly. So the wheels have to turn freely. Now, at the centre of the wheel is this empty space, and through the empty space, the axle goes. But what if it's a bad fit between the wheel and the axle? Then the wheel does not turn. It's stuck. It starts to grind. And the vehicle does not move, or it moves with great difficulty. This is dukkha, a badly fitting wheel. So things don't move properly. Everything is difficult. It's like pushing a cart uphill. This is dukkha. Another way of looking at it is you have a wheel, and at the centre you have the central point, and that central point is empty. Whenever you see the pictures of the wheel, that the central hub is empty. There's nothing in it. And this emptiness is dukkha. It's bad, it's unpleasant, it's painful. Here, dukkha refers to the painful emptiness that we feel at the core of our being, at the centre of our being. Each of us feels that something about us is not right. Something is wrong. And it needs to be fixed. And that's why we come here. If we didn't have that feeling, we would be somewhere else. We'd be watching TV or whatever. We have this sense of things being not right. And this bothers us, it bugs us, even though life is going pretty well. You know, we've got a nice house, job, the family is okay. Life is pretty good. But still, it's not enough. Something is unsatisfactory. Of course, people who are driven to make more and more money, this is an expression of their dukkha, a painful sense of something missing. And so they try to fill it up with more money. Consumerism. I feel there's something wrong, there's something missing, so I'll go out and buy something. And then I'll be okay. We have this sense of something missing at the core of our being, and we try to fill up that emptiness with different things, but it doesn't work. This is the source of our dissatisfaction, and it's also the source of our action. This is what brings us here. Now, why does the Buddha, in his first discourse, begin with dukkha? His audience are advanced practitioners, very hard line, tough practitioners. Why did they become practitioners? Because of dukkha. Why did the Buddha himself leave home? Because of dukkha. He's talking about dukkha as the starting point for the practice. He's talking to practitioners, and he talks about dukkha because he knows that's what gets them going. That's why they are doing what they are doing, because they know dukkha. They understand it. And that's why they're there in the first place. This teaching is about practice. It's about what to do. And a lot of it has to do with the relationship regarding pain. I am moved by my pain to do something. So when the Buddha talks about practice, he'll start with dukkha. Then he analyses dukkha, and just very briefly, you get 3 levels, 3 layers of dukkha. Birth, aging, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are dukkha. This is ordinary everyday suffering. Association with the unloved and separation from the loved and not getting what one wants is dukkha. As I go through life, I find myself inevitably, I will be in situations that I don't want. I don't want to be here, but here I am. Association with the unloved. Separation from the loved. I want to be there, but I can't be there. I want to be with this person, but I can't be with this person. I want to be doing what I love to do, but I can't. So this is separation from the loved. Not getting what one wants. These aspects of dukkha are more subtle and more universal. This refers to the uncontrollability of life. Life moves, it changes all the time, and there's no one in charge. We are not in charge. And because we are not in charge, things happen that we have no control over. We find ourselves in situations we don't want to be. But we can't help it. That's the way it is. And finally, he says the 5 aggregates associated with clinging are dukkha. In Pali, these are the Panch Upadana Khanda. Khanda is usually translated as aggregate, but in English you miss the force of the original Pali. The Panch Upadana Khanda. Khanda means a mass. It can mean a collection. Anything which is very big, for example, the side of an elephant is a khanda. If you have a big building, the side of the building, the wall of the building would be khanda. Also, it's a collection of things. If you get a big pile of sand, that pile of sand would be a khanda. So aggregate, a collection of things. But it also is used in everyday Pali to refer to a pile of fuel. Let's say you want to start a fire. So you get a big pile of wood and you pile it all up. That's a khanda. Upadana khanda. Upadana is usually translated as clinging or attachment, but it also means fuel. The Buddha's original audience would be hearing this on two levels. One is this technical term which the Buddha is introducing for the first time, the 5 aggregates associated with clinging, but the other is they will be hearing 5 masses of fuel ready to burn. So imagine someone's prepared 5 big fires and the fuel is tinder dry. Strike a match, it all goes up. This is the image that the Buddha is presenting. He's saying that our lives are like that. We are, at the best of times, we're like a pile of fuel ready to burn at a moment's notice. And the fire would be the fire of anger, or the fire of desire, or the fire of frustration, and so on. These are 5 fires ready to flare up at any moment. This is referring to dukkha at its fundamental level. The fact that anything that we experience is made up out of parts. And anything made up out of parts is going to collapse at some time. So the human body is a complex system. It's made up of parts. Sooner or later, it will collapse. It has to. The mind is very complex, made up of parts. Sooner or later, it goes bad. It has to. The planet is made up of parts. The climate is made up of parts. When it goes bad, there's a disaster. Everything is fragile and everything is going to break down. It's just inevitable. So this is the deepest level of dukkha. And then the Buddha moves on to second and third truths. Now, the first truth is just laying out dukkha. Second and third, it starts to get dynamic. It's about the arising and the cessation of dukkha. This is the Noble One's truth of the arising of dukkha. It is craving, which leads to further becoming, is bound up with obsession and delight, and finds its delight now here, now there. Specifically, craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. The arising of dukkha is craving, in Pali tanha, which literally means thirst. Now again you get, the Buddha is introducing a technical term, but he's using a word from everyday language, which his audience immediately understands. The arising of dukkha is thirst. We have this sense of something missing, something at the core of our being, and we want to fill that space. It's like we have a thirst. The Buddha often uses this image of someone stumbling through a dry, hot landscape, or in this case, moist, but still very hot, and we're thirsty, sweating a lot, so there's an enormous thirst, and we've got to get something to drink. And we're driven by that thirst. So he'll give the image of someone on a journey through a hot landscape, very, very thirsty, looking for some cool water to drink. And this is the human condition. We're driven by this thirst. And it doesn't matter how much we consume, that hole, that gap at the centre of our being is never filled. So we keep consuming, but it's not enough. We're driven by this thirst, and it gets translated as craving. Craving is desire, obviously, but it's a particular kind of desire. Sometimes the Buddha gets a bad press because people think he's against desire. He doesn't like any desire. This is not true. Certain forms of desire are very good, in fact necessary. But some kinds of desire are very destructive. This kind of desire, which he calls tanha, which we're translating as craving, is a particular kind of desire. First of all, it leads to further becoming. We satisfy this desire, but it sets us up for another one. It keeps moving, it keeps going. It's bound up with obsession and delight, raga and nandi. Raga is usually translated as passion, but I prefer to translate it as obsession. Raga literally means colour. It's the colouring of the heart when it's possessed by a desire. In English we have the expression when someone is very angry, we might say, he saw red. And what we mean is his chitta, his heart, was completely overcome by just one thing. And so he's obsessed by this one thing, and then he acts out of that obsession. This is the kind of desire that the Buddha is talking about. More generally, in modern society, we would call this addiction. If someone has an addictive relationship to something, they can't get enough of it. They're obsessed with it. And the whole life starts to revolve around this particular something that they desire. So this is raga, obsession. And then you get nandi, translated as delight. Now delight here is the payoff. We have a desire, we satisfy the desire, and we get some kind of satisfaction from it. There's some kind of payoff. This is nandi, delight. But delight has a characteristic of agitation, of restlessness. And there's a stimulus involved. And because this stimulus is temporary, and it has this quality of agitation, of restlessness, and so it goes very quickly, and then we want another one. So I consume something, it's satisfying, but then I want another. And I consume that, and it's satisfying, but then I want another. And I want another, and another, and another, and so on. A classic example might be the desire of someone who is addicted to cigarettes to smoke another cigarette. The person smokes the cigarette, and there's a satisfaction that comes from that. But the satisfaction is temporary. And quickly, it sets up the desire for another one. And so that desire is satisfied. And then quickly, it sets up the desire for another one, and then another one, and then another one, and another one, another one, another one, another one, another one, and so on. You have a satisfaction which is always being promised, but it never quite arrives. So it's always one more, one more, one more, one more. This is the quality of restlessness involved in craving. And so the Buddha says it leads to further becoming. It finds its delight now here, now there. It's restless. Our craving is constantly moving from one thing to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. You get a sense of it in meditation. Let's say you're sitting there and there's an itch. I've got to scratch. Then I'll be okay. Once I scratch, I'll be able to start meditating. So I do it, and then, but now my left knee hurts. I'll just, yes, that's better. Okay, good, now I can meditate. My neck is stiff. I'll just, okay, now I can meditate. I just had this interesting thought. I'll just think this thought. And now I can meditate. But this foot now, I've just got to move it. And now I can meditate. An hour goes by, I've just got to go to the toilet, and then I can meditate. It's always the next thing, 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 and it never stops. This is craving, that particular kind of desire, which is craving. There are forms of desire which are not craving. An example would be the desire to give up cigarettes. Let's say that desire arises, and I satisfy that desire by giving up cigarettes. When I satisfy that desire, it dissolves the desire itself. Once satisfied, there's no more agitation. The result is a calmness. There's nothing to do next. It's finished. Sometimes we get a sense of that in the meditation. When we're really with the experience and there's nothing to get next, there's nothing to hold, what we have is fine. It's okay. It's not perfect, but it doesn't matter. What we have is quite all right as it is. And that's when the body settles, the mind settles, the bell goes, and we're taken by surprise. The time has passed quickly. We are satisfying a desire, but there's nothing else that it leads to. The desire itself is dissolved in its satisfaction. This kind of desire is healthy. The Buddha talks about Dhamma Raga, Dhamma Nandi, passion for the Dharma, delight in the Dharma. And this kind of desire and delight is healthy. But when he's talking about craving, it's the unhealthy kind of desire. And he says this is specifically craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. Sense pleasures. When the Buddha talks about sense pleasures, he's not simply talking about having a nice time. He's talking about a particular kind of pleasure, which is stimulus-driven. Some kinds of pleasure require a particular sense stimulus, and then there's an excitement, there's an agitation, and then the stimulus fades. We have to do it again. So again, this is craving. Pleasure which is stimulus-driven, as distinct from pleasure which is much more subtle and peaceful and calm. So, for example, if I go down to lunch and I'm dishing out the different dishes and I've got them all on the plate, and there's one which is new, so I try it. Oh, this is really good. This is really, really good. I like this one. So I better have another one. Oh, that was great. I better have another one. Ah, fantastic. Have another one. Oh, there's none left. Oh. And then the pleasure quickly turns into a form of pain because the stimulus is gone. I'm missing it. Versus the pleasure that I'm here at SBS, which is a very beautiful environment, and it always seems to be beautiful. The rain and the mist. It's very beautiful. Sometimes there's no rain and there's no mist and there's a huge view. It's very beautiful. Sometimes the sun is rising. It's very beautiful. Sometimes the sky is bright. It's very lovely. Sometimes the sun sets. It's lovely. There's no stimulus. I let myself go into this environment. There's a pleasure in being here and being open to this environment, but it's not a particular stimulus. It's got a wider aspect to it. It's much calmer and much steadier. This creates a different kind of pleasure. And this kind of pleasure, the pleasure of nature, is very wholesome, very healthy. And the Buddha enjoyed it. The Buddha had favourite places that he liked to go and to meditate. He recommended certain places to meditate because they're so beautiful, very appropriate for meditation. He has a pleasure coming through the senses. But when he's talking about sense pleasure, he's talking about this stimulus-driven pleasure, unwholesome pleasure. And then he talks about craving for existence and craving for non-existence. You notice we're back in the extremes. Existence, non-existence. The craving for existence is the craving to be someone. I want to be someone definite. It might be I want to be someone important. Or it might be I want to be a good meditator. And of course, I want people to notice that I'm a good meditator. I want people to notice that I've been sitting here for an hour and a half. What's the point of going through all the effort of sitting here for 1.5 or 2 hours if nobody even notices? Or the desire for non-existence, I don't want anyone to notice me. I want to hide because someone might notice me. That's non-existence. So existence, non-existence. I want to be someone. And then non-existence. No, I don't want to be anyone. We flip from one to the other. The desire for existence might come out as an ideology of eternalism. I want to be someone who lives forever. Or I might work hard all my life to leave a monument behind that people will never forget me because there's this big monument with my name on it. The desire for non-existence, the desire for annihilation. It can come out in some forms of drug taking, for example. People might drink a lot of alcohol because they want to forget that they exist. Or, in its extreme form, suicide. I don't want to exist anymore. I just want to disappear. So these are the extremes of the desire for existence and the desire for non-existence. And both of them are driven by craving. And then he says, this is the Noble One's truth of the cessation of dukkha. It is the complete cessation of that very craving, abandoning it, renouncing it, releasing it, letting it go. Letting go of the drivenness. So we could say, first of all, that craving is a sense of being driven by something. We don't feel free. We're pushed and pulled by our desires and our aversions, our greed, our hatred, our delusion. You notice the second and the third truths. The first truth is one thing, dukkha. The second and the third truths introduce craving. And they're all about relationship. When there's craving, there's dukkha. When there's no craving, there's no dukkha. When craving arises, dukkha arises. When craving ceases, dukkha ceases. The second and the third truths are about relationship. Dynamic relationship. Now, this is very familiar, isn't it? This is the middle way. But here the middle way looked at in a very specific context. How does pain arise? This sense that I have of being driven, of things not being good enough. If it's here, it must be here because of something else. Something must be causing it. So what is it? Because if I can change that, I can change the drivenness. If I'm suffering because something else is happening. If I can identify that and change it, then the suffering will dissolve. This is where the Buddha introduces dependent arising, his fundamental principle. And he introduces it in the context of the practice, and this is very important. We've been talking a lot about investigation, being precise, going into the experience and seeing what is it, where is it, what does it do, how does it work. And we're doing this because we're introducing ourselves to dependent arising, to these second and third truths. When we talk about investigation in meditation, what do we mean? We don't mean thinking about things. We don't mean that I'm meditating and something happens after, say, 10 minutes, so I spend the next 30 minutes thinking about it. We don't mean that. We mean we recognise, something is arising. It might be some difficulty. What else is happening to make that arise? Another way of looking at it is, if something is happening, something else must be feeding it. What's feeding it? I start to get interested in the experience. Something comes up which is painful and difficult. It's arising because of something else. What might that be? Now, I don't know what it might be, so I can't just go there. But what I can do is start to get curious about how this difficulty moves, what it does. Sometimes it's not there, and sometimes it's there. Sometimes it gets stronger, and sometimes it gets weaker. Sometimes it appears here, and sometimes it appears there. So I start to get interested in the patterns of things. And it's like I'm keeping my eyes open. When we focus on a meditation object, broadly speaking, there's two ways we can do it. One is we can have a kind of funnel vision. We just go into the meditation object and we ignore everything else, everything around it. This can be very good for developing concentration, but it's no good for insight. If we're developing insight, then we have something at the center of our field of awareness, and we can be focused into it, but we're also sensitive to what's happening around it. We're going into something, and then suddenly, as it were, out of the corner of our eye, we see something. Oh, what's that? And then suddenly we realize, oh yes, this affects that. There's a connection. And usually when we start to see these things, we start to see them purely by accident. I'll give you an example for me. I'd be sitting, working on the breathing. I'm absorbing into the rising and the falling. And I don't notice that as I'm doing this, my posture begins to slump. At some point, the body feels tight, and suddenly there's a lot of thinking, and the thinking is up here. And so I adjust the posture and come up, and the thinking seems to clear, and I continue. And then later on I realise, oh, I'm thinking again. But then I notice that the posture has changed again. It goes from here, straight, to like this. And when the head slumps forward, there's some pressure here, and that's when I think. That's where I'm most likely to think. Well, that's interesting. There's a link between posture and thinking. But then, why is it that I start like this and I end up like this? When does that happen? And then after some time I notice, it's the exhalation. When I exhale, I relax. And because my posture is not perfectly balanced, my muscles are holding me up, and so I collapse on the exhalation. And that's when suddenly the energy goes up here, and I start to think. So suddenly, I've got this whole pattern. And now I can start to work with it. I can start to be very attentive on the exhalation. As I exhale, I lift up through the body and keep the head upright and catch any thinking that occurs, particularly on the exhalation. Or I might notice that when I'm doing walking meditation, I'm doing the slow walk and I'm doing everything right, really focusing, and I seem to be staying with the movement of the feet and so on. But at the end of the period, I feel really bad, really tight, stiff. That's odd. Why is that happening? And why have I not noticed it until now? I go back to the walking next time. There's something going on that I'm not noticing. But it still happens. I try again. And then I realise, I'm so busy keeping my awareness with my feet that I'm not noticing what's happening with the rest of the body. And again, I'm not noticing I'm holding the upper body with a lot of tension. I'm not noticing that when I start to walk very slowly, the body gets very stiff because it's artificial. I'm not used to walking slowly. So the body gets very stiff and a lot of pressure builds up, but I don't notice it because I'm so focused on the feet. And I only notice it at the end, and I'm thinking, I don't like walking meditation. Now, when I walk, I open the awareness up to the whole posture, and I start to check the posture and how to move the body. Or it might be I'm sitting and it hurts. I've got pain in the leg. And at some point, I decide that's it, I'm moving. So I end the sitting. But then I start to get curious. Because what I'm doing is I'm studying the pain, because this is what I've been told to do. So I send my awareness to the pain, all these sensations. And I discover there's all sorts of elemental sensations, and they come and they go, they get worse, they get better, like a graph we were talking about this morning, going up and down. And after some time, suddenly, that's it, enough, I move. But then I think, but why then? Why did I move then? Why didn't I move 10 seconds later? Why not 10 seconds before? Why then? So I start to get curious. The next sitting, I'm meditating, pain, going up and down, up and down. I move. Didn't catch it. Try again. And at some point, I realise, what happens is, I'm staying with the sensations, and they're going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And then suddenly, aversion arises. And when it arises really, really fast, because this is the mind, and the mind moves really quickly. Aversion, I don't like this. Suddenly, boom, it's there. And as soon as that arises, that's when I move. I don't move because of the sensation, which is in the body. I move because of the aversion, which is in the mind. Then I realise, what I should be doing is not just watching the sensation, I should be watching the aversion in the mind. And I start to notice, there's a relationship between what's happening in the mind, the resistance, the I don't like this, and what's happening in the body, the sensations, and there's a dance going on. And this dance becomes my meditation object. So you see how it works. When we look at experience, it becomes a whole series of relationships. But to start to notice them, we have to be a bit wider in our focus. We don't just narrowly focus on one thing and ignore everything else. We focus on one thing, but we keep a sense of what's going on around it. And we keep interested. Why is it like this? Why is it like this now? Why does this happen at this time of day, but not at that time of day? I start to get interested. I start to get curious. And then that's when I start to notice things. That's when these relationships start to reveal themselves. The Buddha is introducing the basic principle here in the Four Truths, but he's focusing on a specific relationship, the relationship between drivenness and pain. When I'm driven to get something or to avoid something, that's when it hurts. He's saying, start to pay attention to your sense of being driven, this craving. And the craving can be both a desire, I must get this, and I must get it now. And the flip side of desire is aversion. I want to get out of here, and I want to get out of here right now. We start to do really basic things. When we notice this coming up in our meditation, instead of immediately acting on our desire or our aversion, we wait and we watch the desire. We watch the aversion. We want to know, what's going on here? What is this? Why is this? Not thinking about it, but just being curious to see what happens if I stay here a bit longer. If I don't respond the way I normally do, what happens? And something is revealed. The Buddha is, in the Four Truths, presenting how the middle way can be applied in one's practice. And again, he's talking to advanced practitioners. So he's telling them, look at your quality of drivenness and the relationship to pain. In their case, they have left behind ordinary lay life. They look at lay people and they think, hopeless. They're completely driven by their desires. That's terrible. I'll never get to Nibbana. But they haven't noticed that they are equally driven. They are driven by their aversion. They have aversion to samsara. They have aversion to ordinary everyday life. They want something special. So they think they are not driven. They think they're free. But the Buddha is saying, actually, look, and you will find that you are just as driven as everybody else. It's just that what's driving you is something different. But still, you're driven. And because you are driven, you're suffering. Let go, the third truth. That drivenness, that craving, let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go. And then the dukkha will vanish. He's teaching a practice to the 5 ascetics and, of course, to us. And then he says, this is the Noble One's truth of the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. The Noble Eightfold Path of right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right energy, right mindfulness and right unification. He comes back to the Eightfold Path, which he's already looked at before. Notice how it goes in cycles. Things curl around and come back and intersect. This is typical of the Buddha's teaching. And of course what we're talking about mostly during this retreat is right mindfulness as part of that system. These are the 4 truths. The Buddha goes on after there, but we won't go into the rest of the discourse because it's basically an elaboration of these 4 truths. And then we come to the end of the discourse. This is what the Blessed One said, and the group of 5 bhikkhus rejoiced in his words. And as this teaching was being given, the perfect and stainless vision of Dharma arose in Venerable Kondanya. Whatever is of the nature to arise, all that is of the nature to cease. As the teaching is being given, Venerable Kondanya was one of the 5. Suddenly he gets it. And he has the vision of the Dhamma. He sees the Dhamma. He sees what's really going on. This is the first breakthrough into Nibbana itself. And it's classically called stream entry, the first level of awakening. And there's a little verse which appears again and again in the sutras which expresses the insight that comes with this understanding. Whatever is of the nature to arise, all that is of the nature to cease. So you notice again, it's about dynamics. Arising, ceasing, coming, going, beginning, ending, flowing, turning, moving, everything dynamic. Whatever is of the nature to arise. What is of the nature to arise? Anything that has a beginning. What is it that has a beginning? Well, everything, basically. Whatever is of the nature to arise, all that is of the nature to cease. Now, the radical aspect of this teaching is in the all. All that is of the nature to cease. Everything. Usually we are quite happy to see that things arise and cease, but we always hold back. There's something that does not arise and cease. Let's say I'm a meditator and I'm deep in insight meditation and I'm seeing everything arise and cease, come and go, come and go. And I'm sitting there and I'm seeing it all. And I'm feeling very pleased with myself because I'm having this deep insight. Have I seen that all this is of the nature to cease? No, because I think there's someone here seeing arising and ceasing. And this someone is outside this process and does not cease. When this verse says all of this is of the nature to cease, it includes the meditator herself. Everything goes, everything. And this is the entry into the unconstructed, the entry into Nibbana. And then the discourse concludes. When the wheel of Dharma had been set in motion by the Blessed One, the earth-dwelling Devas cried out, at Varanasi, in the deer park at Isipatana, This unsurpassed wheel of Dharma has been set in motion by the Blessed One. It cannot be stopped by any Samana or Brahmana or Deva or Mara or Brahma or by anyone in the world. Hearing the cry of the earth-dwelling Devas, the Devas of the realm of the four great kings cried out. The Tavatimsa Devas, the Yama Devas, the Tusita Devas, the Nimararati Devas, the Paranimitta Vasavati Devas, the Devas of Brahma's assembly cried out. At Varanasi, in the deer park at Isipatana, this unsurpassed wheel of Dharma has been set in motion by the Blessed One. It cannot be stopped by any Samana or Brahmana or Deva or Mara or Brahma or by anyone in the world. And so at that moment, at that instant, the cry spread as far as the Brahma world, and this 10,000-fold world system shook, quaked and trembled, and an immeasurable glorious radiance appeared in the world, surpassing the divine majesty of the Devas. Something just happened, and it has cosmic significance. All these Deva realms, all the Devas are very happy. And it's at this moment that the wheel turns. It hasn't turned before. When the Buddha attains full awakening, the wheel does not turn. But when Kondanya just gets a glimpse of the teaching, that's when the wheel turns. And the turning of the wheel is other people understanding the Dharma. When we understand the Dharma, the wheel turns. So the wheel has been turning for 2,500 years. Because for 2,500 years people have been practicing this and understanding the Dharma. And so the wheel turns. And it's turning today, and it will continue to turn. Our job is to keep it going by understanding what the Buddha is talking about. The discourse ends with this. Then the Blessed One cried out in inspiration, Kondanya understands. Kondanya understands. This is in Pali, Anyasi Kondanyo. Anyasi Kondanyo. This is how Venerable Kondanya acquired the name Anya Kondanya. Kondanya who understands. Now I like this ending because it's the only discourse that I've ever come across in which the Buddha, when someone gets it, when someone has awakening, he gets up and dances for joy. Fantastic. He understood. He got it. Yay! And he's up there dancing a jig. And from then on, you read the sutras and thousands of people get enlightened afterwards. And the Buddha just sits there. Oh yeah. Another 500 arahants. Very nice. But this time he really gets excited. And he's excited because this is the first time this has happened, and this means he knows he can teach this. Remember, all this time, since his awakening, since the first time that the idea of teaching arose, he's had this doubt. Surely this is so subtle, this is so profound, this is so difficult, that no one else is going to get it. But now, 2 months later, someone else has got it. He's figured out a way to teach this so that other people can understand it. And that's why he's so happy. Now he knows it won't die with him. It'll keep going. The wheel will keep turning. And this is why this discourse is so important in the tradition.